me if I could teach Sunday, and it's been rough to say the least. All right, I won't get into it too much because you guys know how rough it can be. But I'm going over all these different things, and what am I going to teach? And Luke chapter 14. You guys know Luke chapter 14? Good. If you don't, if it's fresh, good. That's the greatest way to look at it. But what's really interesting in Luke chapter 14 is this is one of those chapters where everyone stops and they don't do the whole chapter. So with your guys' permission, or without it, I'm going to read the entire chapter so that we keep context, right? Context is important. A painting is not a real painting unless it's got a frame around it. And every chapter is framed, okay? So if you guys have found your spot, everybody there? You guys find your spots really quick, really fast. I've got to put a bookmark everywhere that I go. I have to have a bookmark to find my place. But without further ado, Luke chapter 14. One Sabbath, when he went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and the Pharisees, saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. Then he took him and healed him and sent him away. And he said to them, "Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on the Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out?" And they could not reply to these things. Now he told a parable to those who were invited when he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, "When you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit in the place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him, and he who invited you both will come and say to you, 'Give your place to this person.' And then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, 'Friend, move up higher.' Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." He said also to the man who had invited him, "When you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just." When one of those who reclined at the table with him heard these things, he said to him, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." But he said to them, "A man once gave a great banquet and invited many. And at the time for the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I've bought a field, and I must go out and see it. Please excuse me.' And another said, 'I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I must go examine them. Please excuse me.' And another said, 'I have married a wife, therefore I cannot come.' So the servant came and reported these things to the master. Then the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, 'Go out quickly to the streets and the lanes of the city and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.' And the servant said, 'Sir, what you commanded has been done, and still there is room.' And the master said to the servant, 'Go to the highways and the hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet.' Now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, 'If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Or which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, "This man began to build and was not able to finish." Or what king, going out to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is of no use, either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown away. He who has an ear, let him hear. That's Jesus dropping the mic. Okay, so that's really good. Okay, you guys get it? Okay, quickest sermon I ever did. Okay, close out my book and walk away. No, there's some really, really interesting things in here. Okay, really, really interesting things in here. So, do you guys have like little headers before your chapters, or before it starts what is seen as a new line of thinking? Well, did you guys know those weren't in the original manuscript that Luke wrote, right? Those weren't there. And the little numbers that you guys have, those weren't there either. This is one continuous thought, okay? And we try to break it up to try to make it more manageable, because Jesus says something that kind of should make you uncomfortable in your seat, doesn't he? What's that? Come on, you guys can talk too. I mean, I don't have to be the only guy flapping his gums up here, right? What is it that makes everybody uncomfortable about this one? This is one that I argue with people more than any other, especially my Baptist friend at work. Okay, because everyone wants to change Jesus' words, don't they? When he says, unless you hate those people, you can't follow me. Okay, so clearly, when the teacher of the law asks Jesus, and he says, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus says, well, you're the teacher of the law, you tell me. I'm just paraphrasing, okay, that's modern English. Jesus doesn't exactly say that. My Hebrew's a little rusty when it comes to that. But he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. But, well, is Jesus contradicting himself here? I don't think so. He doesn't ever do that. So, I've said before, if you want to shortcut sanctification, guess what you do? Highlight all the things that you highlight in green, everything you don't understand. Highlight in red the things that you think you understand. And highlight in blue the things you disagree with. And I would say a lot of people's Bibles would be blue because everyone tries to do mental gymnastics. The few people that I've heard try to teach this, everyone will stop short of that part, or they'll begin after he says that part. How many times have you guys heard somebody say that Jesus tells you to hate your brother, your mother, your brother, even yourself? Hate your family and yourself. Not too many people will say that because it makes everybody uncomfortable. It's hard to reconcile with everything else he teaches. So what do? Instead of trying to understand it, we kind of just tiptoe around it, don't we? Yeah, we gloss over it, right? Because we've become so familiar with it. We have a picture of who we want Jesus to be, and that is not the Jesus we want. Okay? So, I'm going to back up in the chapter a little bit. And in 14, at the very beginning of 14 here, it opens with, it's Sabbath, right? We open with the Sabbath. I'm going to paint the picture. I'm going to try to keep it under 3 hours, Mike. You're welcome. But I'm going to try to paint a picture, and I'm going to gloss over some things. I really recommend that you read this chapter on your own and wrestle with it, because you should. Because it should be something that you wrestle with. And I'm going to ask some questions, and I'm going to give you guys homework like I always do, and force you to reconcile with this, because it's right there in front of your face. So what's the most holy day in the Jewish calendar? You guys know? Well, you could say atonement. You could say that. But the most holy day actually in their calendar is the Sabbath. Because what is it they celebrate every week? Sabbath. We kind of do the same thing. Everybody on Friday. How many people are excited on Friday? You get paid. You're off on Saturday. You get to put your feet up on the couch. How many people are excited about that? It's the one day of rest that you get. Well, did you know that's not what the Sabbath was actually designed for in the first place? The Sabbath was designed for you to develop trust. Did you know that? How many people do you think actually honor a Sabbath, one day out of the week, where you completely trust God and you say, you know what, I'm not going to worry about anything. I did my 6 days. Now God is going to provide on the seventh. They didn't even follow it very well, honestly. Because guess what? The Levites, they always had to commit sacrifice on what day of the week? They never got to honor the Sabbath. And, well, who is he talking to? Interesting. They're teachers of the law. So he uses this, right? He uses the Sabbath thing. And he says, look, guys, do you say it's all right? Do you say it's all right that you heal on the Sabbath? Does he wait for them to respond? No, he just does it, doesn't he? He's like, which one of you would leave your kid in a ditch? He's referring to the law, Leviticus. Because there's certain things that you're allowed to do on the Sabbath. If somebody's in trouble, life, danger, if enemies come into your town, there's certain exceptions to the Sabbath. This guy has dropsy, and clearly Jesus says, this is lawful. But he asks them the question first, which is really interesting. Why would he ask them the question if he was going to do it anyway? Well, why would somebody who knows everything already ask you a question? Because they want you to think about it. And then he does it. And then guess what? You got to think about it. Well, we're going to move down a little bit farther. Because what I'm doing right now is I'm painting the outside of the picture. I'm not going to change Jesus' words because he means them. When he says what he says, he means what he says. He doesn't just say things arbitrarily like we do for our own status or whatever we want other people to think what kind of person we are. Jesus doesn't say that because he doesn't have to. Because none of us establish his identity. He's already had an identity that's been established. Okay, so I'm giving away too much. Okay, so they remained silent. So he took him and he healed him. And he said, which one of you, having a son, and what did they do? I mean, he just healed a guy with dropsy. And you don't have any words. They don't do nothing. They have no response whatsoever. Is that normal behavior from a human? Like if someone was to come in this room right now and they were crippled, like let's say they're in a wheelchair, and I just said, hey, does anyone think that it's all right if I heal this guy today? And then I do it. And then you all are just like, whatever. Is that normal human behavior? It's not. It's not normal human behavior when you really think about it. So what is it? Okay, so I'm confused now. I hope you guys are all confused with me. Okay? The moment Jesus gets you confused, guess what's coming next? A parable. You guys knew it. A parable. Why? If you go and you look for every parable, because people will teach just a parable. You guys been to sermons or teachings where someone will just teach the parable and try to make it everything, but they'll leave the context out, the conversation that happens before the parable, and try to teach you what it's about, and try to make it go in all kinds of different directions that it wasn't meant to go in the first place? Because who's he telling the parable to? Well, verse 7. Now he told a parable to those who were invited when he noticed how they were choosing the places of honor. Okay, so this was really interesting. Luke throws that in there, right? Do you think he throws that in there arbitrarily? Why? Well, because he's about to show us something, right? Because Jesus is noticing how people are arranging themselves in the room. Who's taking the best seat of honor, right? He's arranging. You guys have seen this before, right? We do this here, don't we? We do this here. The people who are better, they sit up front, and the people who are less, they sit in the back, right? Well, I mean, really, that's what we do, don't we? I mean, we do that. Our status is attached to our seat, even though all the seats are the same color. How many of you have switched seats around in this place? None of you that I'm looking at, because I'm always looking in the same direction for the, right, Charlie? Right? So, I mean, we get comfortable in our positions, don't we? And here comes Jesus. What does he do? It's time to shake everything up. Because he notices them all sitting down, and this is so funny, because, I mean, as an outside observer to this, not one of the guys in the room, right? Remember how Bible stories work? You hold somebody up arbitrarily and you go, hey, look at that person and they're not even getting it. They don't get it at all, right? You guys remember Adam and Eve? Adam and Eve, human and woman, right? You remember those two? You hold the character up. So here's these guys and they're sitting around and they're like, oh yeah, well, my towel is nicer than your towel. So I'm going to sit closer to the teacher, because this guy is the guest of honor. Now, Jesus is the guest of honor at this occasion, because what is he doing? He just keeps talking, doesn't he? If you're the guest of honor, everyone has to listen. Okay? So I'm trying to set the table. Get it? It's like a double entendre. Trying to set the table. So Jesus is sitting at the highest place. He's sitting in the highest seat because he's been invited to this thing, and he watches all these other guys jockeying for position. Like, that guy's only been a Pharisee for a year. He needs to sit way back there. And then Jesus is like, what does he say? He says, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit in the place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him and also invited. So Jesus basically it's kind of funny, because they're all jockeying for position because they want to hear what Jesus has to say. And the first thing he says is, all you guys who think that you're important in here, who've moved closer to me, guess what? You did the wrong thing. You failed. And all you guys who are way over there, you can't hear anything that I'm saying. So now you should be thoroughly confused, okay? Because the parable gets deeper. It gets deeper. Because this isn't, if you were to think of a parable, you would say, this isn't really a parable because there's no point, right? There is. That's the first parable that he tells. So the one who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Good class, good. I'm glad you guys are all on the same page with me here. So he says, so here you go. You've got these guys who have all fought for position at the table, right? I'm just going to paint a funny picture for you. You got all these guys who are jockeying for position at the table, and they get the position they want, and they're like, okay, I'm sitting close to Shmuel, who's, he's the guy, right? Like, this guy knows what he's talking about, and I can hear what the guest speaker has to say. I'm in the perfect position. I've put on the right clothes. I've done everything right. And now the guy who's the guest speaker just told me that I did the wrong thing, so I'm going to go take that guy's seat, who's the lowest in the room. And then that guy who was the lowest takes my seat. And then it's all of a sudden it becomes musical chairs. Right? All of a sudden it becomes musical chairs. So they're all confused now. Thoroughly confused. And what do you think happens? They're confused? Well, here we go, another parable. Jesus just keeps on going. Because he wants to confuse you to the point to where you're willing to listen. Because in truth, most of the time we go and listen to someone who's speaking publicly, what are we doing? We're carefully picking apart their words, trying to say, what does he really mean when he says that? Is he talking about me? Have you guys ever done that before? No. You guys are good people, right? You guys would never go to someone who's speaking and just listen so that you could put down everything that they had to say. No one's ever done that, right? Like Pharisees who invited this guy who they don't know who he is to a feast so that he could tell them parables about feasts, right? And where they should be sitting and where they shouldn't be sitting. All right, you guys with me still? All right, that's not good because you're supposed to be confused as it could be. The point comes at the end of the chapter. So he said also to the man who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors. Well, why? Because if you invite them, guess what they're going to do? They're going to repay you. They're going to say, oh, I owe them a debt because they threw this big dinner for me and invited me to the big dinner, guess what I have to do? I have to throw a big dinner for them. Okay, because we're moving closer to a point. I hope you guys are tracking with me here. Because what is the kingdom of heaven not about? I'm not going to answer that one for you. That's going to be homework. And it's right in here. If you look very carefully, there's a pearl of wisdom hidden right in the middle of this. So he says, when you invite your friends, relatives, rich neighbors, all those people, guess what? They're going to repay you. And then guess what? You don't have any reward. Why? Because when do you want to be repaid? When does everyone in this room want to be repaid? Do you want to be repaid when you walk out the door? Or do you want to be repaid on the resurrection of the just? Is that when you want your payment in full? Do you want status now? Or do you trust him enough to wait? Because he throws that in there, that's like a bombshell in the room. Because one thing you don't see here is the Pharisees were fervent about the resurrection. You guys know that? That's the one thing. They were just like, Jesus starts talking about the resurrection, and all their eyes light up, and they think, oh, yes, we're right, because that's what Ezekiel and Elijah, they were talking about, the resurrection of the just. And Jesus just drops a bomb. He just throws a grenade in the room, right? And now everyone's got to deal with it. Who's going to end up with the grenade? As they jockeyed for position on who's going to sit next to the guy who just threw the grenade. Realizing that they're probably in the worst seat possible to deal with the things that he's throwing at them at this very moment. So here's one guy, okay? Now I always imagine Peter doing this. So all of a sudden, Jesus throws this bombshell into the room, and you can hear them all, just silence. Like that silence right after a parade. Everything's so loud and roar and conflict and decisions and people murmuring and things like that. Like, what is he talking about? I can't hear him. And the guy next to him is like, I have no idea. I'm confused. I'm supposed to be sitting down where the guy who can't hear is. You guys know that. You've been in a room or a banquet hall where everyone's talking all at once and it's just chaos. And then all of a sudden Jesus says, the resurrection of the just. Silence befalls the room. And there's always people who are very uncomfortable with silence. I'm not one of those people. I could sit and I know it seems weird because I'm the guy who can't stop talking about the Bible, but I can sit in silence for hours and love it, every second of it. Not hear a single sound. Right? It keeps me awake. Actually, for me to fall asleep, I have to stop from thinking. So I have to hear somebody else have thoughts so that I can actually fall asleep. Anyone else has that problem? It might just be me. I'm weird, I guess. I think a lot, okay? And I thought for the longest time that everybody was like that. But my wife tells me that no one is like that. I said, well, how can you know that? Right? Okay, this is supposed to be funny. How can you know that? Because, I'm the guy who thinks about everything all the time, Purple chairs, a room, everybody sitting in the spots. Well, 14. Seems like a good spot to go today, God. So here's a guy, and he's reclining at the table. So he's the only guy who's relaxed in the room. Why would Luke throw that in there? Because, he's clearly probably sitting in the middle where these people are like, what is he saying? And those people are like, I have no idea. And this guy's like, well, whatever. He's reclined at the table. He's relaxing. He's just whatever. You got these people, resurrection of the just, all of a sudden everything stops. Uh-oh. I was having a thought, and now everyone stopped talking, and he's uncomfortable with silence, so what does he do? Well, he says, all of a sudden, he just breaks out, and he said, blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God. It reminds me of Peter. When Jesus is like, well, how many times should you forgive your brother? Peter's like, 7. Right? He says, 7. And Jesus is like, 70 times 7, Peter. It's got to be complete, right? That's what that means when he says that. That one was free, by the way. It doesn't mean 7 times 7 is 49, or 7 times 70 is 490. It doesn't mean that. It means the same thing, Lamech. You guys remember Lamech? grandson of Cain. Lamech was like, if any man harms me, if Cain was avenged 7 times, then I'll be avenged 7 times. Oh, exactly the same thing Jesus said. His vengeance would be complete because he was that bad of a dude, okay? When Jesus says forgiveness, he says complete. That's what he means when he says that. It's not like we're supposed to that's 395. Well, honey, you better be careful, right? You better be careful. We're getting close to the end of the road here, okay? We're counting numbers. So I know I got off on a little trail there, but here's this guy, and he says, blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God. In this room full of complete silence. And then Jesus turns right to that guy. He turns right to that guy. Because who does he say it to? Who does he tell this parable to? The room? What does it say? He looked right at him. Like one of them soul-piercing gazes. Right? Like all of a sudden, like this dude who's not been paying attention the whole time, he doesn't know up from down. He's like, I'll just repeat the same thing that gets me, the hoorah every time. Every time. It would be like the guy in the Marines. I don't know, any Marines in here? No? Nobody in the Marines? It'd be like the one Marine. You guys know Marines though, right? All they have to say is hoorah, and then everyone else is like, yeah, that guy's the man. Okay? That's what he just did. He just did that to try to get attention so that somebody would make noise again and it would take the attention off of him so he could go back to his little riding his Honda, like my dad says. Riding his Honda or playing in his sandbox inside of his head, like I do often. I can identify with this guy right here. So he says, oh, blessed is the man who will eat bread in the kingdom of God. So Jesus turns right at him, looks him right in the eyes, and he says, a man once gave a banquet and invited many. And at a time for the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, come, for everything is now ready. But guess what they did? They did make excuses, didn't they? You come up with a million excuses. I'm not going to talk through every excuse that they made, but what do we do? What do we do when something is not important to us? When it's not important to you? Make an excuse. And are any of these excuses reasonable? If you just got married, you've got a honeymoon to go to, don't you? Because back then you owed, because dad would pay a dowry, right? Dad would pay a dowry, and guess what? You owed his daughter a baby. You owed it. Like that was, do you see where the debt thing comes in? So wait, if you buy a piece of land, do you not inspect it first? That's the one that kind of throws me off. You inspect the land before you buy it, don't you? Well, why is this guy inspected after he's bought it? Well, he speculated, right? When you think about each one of these excuses they make, one does it because he owes a debt. Another one does it because he's speculating. And the other one, well, I'm not giving you that one. So he says, well, I'm married. He comes back to the master, the guy who's throwing the banquet, who is clearly not the guy who Jesus is telling the parable to. But who can hear him as he's fixated on this one guy, said, blessed is the man who eats bread in the kingdom of God. Everybody can hear him, just like us. Because what are we doing right now? As I'm sitting and teaching this to you guys, you think I'm teaching it to you, or are we eavesdropping on the conversation? We're just like those people, aren't we? You've all got your seats picked out, don't you? Right? Like I do that all the time. The Bible is meant for us to say, look at that person and look at how they didn't get that, and then go, where didn't I get that? Isn't it? We hold ourselves up as the example ultimately, don't we? So when Jesus moves on, he tells this parable, and he says, well, go and invite the poor and the crippled, blind and the lame, and let's fill this place up. Now, when Jesus tells this parable, this is a really good parable, by the way. It's the greatest, okay? Of the greatest parable teller ever. Because if I have a room that's full of empty space, and I've invited all my friends to come, and they've all given me excuses. They've just told me that my feast is not important, right? They've just told me that my feast is not important. Why would I invite everybody that I can to fill that space so full that no one else can get in? Because I don't want those people in my room. Because if they've made those excuses, guess where they don't deserve to be? In my room, in my space. Now, who is Jesus telling this parable to? He's telling it to a room full of Pharisees. Blessed is the man who what? Eats bread in the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus fixates on the one dude who's not sitting in the right spot and the guy who's not sitting in the wrong spot. He's fixated on the guy who's worried about keeping up appearances, keeping a good family name, worried about his individual status, and moving up in chairs. That's the only reason he showed up to the feast in the first place. And Jesus clearly showed up for another reason. Because he's staring at that guy right in his eyes and telling him something that he's going to think about for the rest of his life. And he's so awesome. Because who's he telling it to? The eavesdroppers too, isn't he? If we're all listening, we can hear him. So, he moves on. He says the servant came and reported these things. Let's fill the place. Make sure no one can even try to squeeze in the building. Right? As a master, it seems kind of spiteful, but, well, they gave him excuses. So he says, for I tell you, verse 24, for I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet. Now, Jesus is awesome. Me and my dad were having a conversation. I was talking about how awesome Jesus is. Because there's a way of telling you that you're missing the point completely without telling you you're missing the point completely. What did the guy say? Blessed is he who eats bread. Okay, good. I like it when you guys help me out, okay? It's great. We're here together. We're all riding on the same train, right? So none of those men who are invited shall taste what? My banquet. Blessed is he who eats bread in the kingdom of heaven. Well, Jesus just kind of like, another grenade. He threw another grenade in the room, okay? Now, here we go. He gets to the point a lot better than I do, okay? I kind of dance around it a little bit, try to make it somewhat entertaining, try to make it hit home. Because a lot of people have taught this and glazed over so much valuable stuff. There's so much treasure in here. Do you guys realize how much treasure there is in here? I'm purposely delaying the next part because this part makes me nervous, if I'm honest. It makes me nervous because this is one of those hard teachings, isn't it? It's hard. It's hard to teach. I've gotten in so many arguments and made so many people angry by saying that Jesus meant what he said when he said what he meant. Because that's what he said. And people who will argue sola scriptura to me, right? And then I say, well, what about Luke chapter 14? And all of a sudden they start doing mental gymnastics. Well, that's not what he really meant. You know what he meant? Where were you sitting at the table when you heard what he said? What position did you put yourself in? You see, the whole parable, it's awesome. Jesus is a genius. I hope you guys can see that here. He's a genius because he was invited to a dinner where they all tried to set the table for him, and he was the one who rearranged it. And now here he goes. Because he's staring at that one dude in the eyes, and he's saying, nobody who was invited to the original feast is going to go eat from it. Right? That's what he just said. A long way. The Pharisees understood how parables worked. Okay? And here we have another one of those. Jesus just threw another grenade in the room. And he says, now, Great crowds accompanied him. Now this takes and reframes it, okay? It reframes it. Luke put these next to each other deliberately. They're sitting right next to each other deliberately, okay? Because that's the way the story is meant to be told. That's the way that we're supposed to read it. So Jesus was sitting in a room with a bunch of Pharisees, and he just told them all that none of them that were invited to the feast were going to be able to go because they were too busy worried about their status or their land or the debt that they owed or their position or title or themselves. Okay? So now we zoom out, right? Like Luke is an awesome storyteller. We zoom out, and there's this great crowd that's following Jesus around. And anytime you see that, prepare for awesomeness because Jesus is about to drop a big bomb. Okay? Because he says this big crowd followed him. Now, this is the thing that blows my mind about Jesus, is every time he starts getting the support that you think a normal person would want. You know, every time he throws a rally, 20,000 people show up. You would think that would empower him. It does, to tell them that they're wrong. Right? He does the exact opposite of what any normal human being would do. Because every time you've seen a pastor at a megachurch? Here's one thing that blows my mind. That you will never see a pastor at a megachurch tell his people how wrong they are about everything. Jesus has a megachurch right here. What's he about to do? Well, he's about to do the opposite of we, as modern evangelicals, think that you should do. Because he says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Anybody uncomfortable in their chair? Should be, because that's what he meant to do. All those guys who were sitting, come on, it's so good, right? Like I use the uncomfortable in your chair reference, but we use it all the time. Come on, he just told these parables about how you shouldn't be sitting in the seat of honor, and he just shakes up the entire room, and he says the people who humble themselves will be exalted, and the people who exalt themselves will be humbled. And these people, usually when you have a crowd of people following something or someone or an idea, why are they following? Why are they following? For the most part. Let's just rewind. I mean, this has happened in recent history, right? Like this wasn't just like last summer, was it? You had these people who were upset that they got locked in their houses for what, a month? I don't know how long they got locked in their houses in Chicago. And all it took was one little thing, and then they latched onto the first movement that just pulled them into it, right? Like I saw modern Christian artists posting little things about how they supported this movement. Right? Do you guys know the movement I'm talking about? I don't have to say it out loud, do I? You know what it is. Why did those people do that? Why would we ever do that? Well, what are we always doing? We're always jockeying for position. Because what's the most important thing to us? Right, it's us. The most important thing to us is us. So, let me explain. Are you guys still with me? You guys good? Are we good? I can keep going. If you guys aren't good, exits are located behind you and then behind me on either side. And I will not hold it against you at all. I'm a Christian. I'm a very forgiving person. I hope you guys are too. Because this might get we might hit some turbulence here. And it's all right, because we'll do it together. There are two types of predominant culture in the world. Just two. People say victim culture, but that's not really culture. That's a mindset. There's two types of culture. There's individualistic-based culture, and I've said this before, so if I bore you with this or you've heard this before, you can go to sleep, it's fine. I'll wake you up right after. But there's individualistic culture. The Greeks started that, believe it or not. The Greeks started that. It was a Greek thing. The measure of all things is man. That's where the philosophy started, where the individual was the most sovereign thing in the entire universe, right? That's Greek culture. And a lot of us, if you prescribe to modern conservative thinking, you're an individualist, right? You think that a person should not be held accountable for the things that their father did or their father's father or their children, that the individual is accountable to the individual. You guys agree? God says so too, that we're accountable to ourselves. And then you have another kind of culture. There's individualistic culture. It's about me. And then you have another kind of culture that's called an honor-shame culture. Anyone ever heard of an honor-shame culture? Honor-shame culture is based on honor and shame. Either you bring honor to your family's name or you bring shame to your family's name. And every decision that you make is based on whether you're going to building up your family or tearing it apart. Okay? The ancient Hebrews, now this is what's really interesting about this. Okay, a little history lesson. So, a little Bible geek here. So what's really interesting is what kind of people do you have in the group that he's talking to? Because, yeah, at the time you had two cultures collide, like force themselves into each other. If you guys have ever read the book of Maccabees, that's the collision, is the book of Maccabees, where you have individualistic culture and you have honor-shame culture. So if your daughter, okay, here's modern day honor and shame culture, is most other countries in the world besides the West, okay? Us in America, we are considered an individualistic culture. We value individuals' achievements, right? Not a family's achievements or a group's achievements, which, some people right now in our universities and around, if you've ever been on Facebook or Twitter, wow, that one. That's what you're seeing is those two ideas colliding. Those two ideas colliding, and they cannot reconcile with each other. Because either you're part of your group identity, either you're a basket weaving African something, or you are your name. And that's all that you carry around. So when Jesus says this, what do you think he's going after? If you don't hate your mother, your brothers, your sister, your entire family, if you don't hate that name, and even yourself, you can't follow me. Well, there was two cultures. Now, he's just introduced a third. You guys realize that's what just happened. Jesus introduced a third culture. See, because what he tells us, okay, what he tells us is that we are more than our name. That's what he says. When he saw the potential in every one of us sitting in this room, and he called us out for the things that we had done and the things that we blamed our family for, all the mistakes that we had made in our lives were based around the culture that we had encapsulated inside of ourselves and said that's who we are. The fake mask that we put on so we could fit into the crowd, so we could get the right seat on the bus, so we could drink from the right fountain, right? Like, that's not that long ago. It's not that long ago, and we're just catching on to this other culture that he's given us. Because what's that culture? And when Jesus says, if you don't hate him, you can't follow me, I think he means it. What you have to see here is when he says, you cannot be what? You can't be what? My disciple. Do you guys know what a disciple is? Just the Greek idea of what a disciple is? It's a student. Just somebody who learns from someone else. Guess what? You cannot learn from Jesus if you're worried about what your family thinks. You guys all agree with that, right? You can't learn anything from Jesus if you seek to honor your family. You can't learn anything from Jesus if you seek to honor yourself. The only time that you can actually learn from Jesus is when you seek to honor him. Right? Because he's the one who's holding the banquet. Everyone else just thinks they threw the party. They just brought the favors. He's the one who arranged the seats the way he wanted them to be. And every time we push back against that, why do we do it? Well, I'll be completely honest. I do it because who am I worried about? Me. Well, what about my family? My kids, what are they going to think? Honor, shame. Am I bringing honor to my family or shame? If those are the priorities, I can't learn anything from what he's about to say. Why do you think he says this to a big group of people? What if they made their priorities? The only reason you follow a big group of people is because what? You want to feel part of something bigger than yourself. But you just feel the part. You're never it. When Jesus calls us out of the person that we were, he saw the potential of who we could be. Even when we can't see it ourselves. That's why faith and trust is the same side of the same coin. And they have to be. Are you guys tracking? You guys with me still? It got really quiet. I could hear that. Because what does he say? He says, you can't be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now, here's the part that Luke is like, it should just drive a nail through all of our hearts. Who loves your kids more than you ever could? And if you want to honor them, why do you keep trying to get in the way? How many people have wanted their kids to do the things that are right in their lives and you only seek the best for them on any given day? You know, sometimes I look at my kids and I go, wow, Dad, thanks, because I've learned so much. I didn't even realize how selfish a person I was until I looked into my firstborn's eyes when he was born. He was premature. We didn't know if he was going to make it. I didn't even know what love was until that. Until I was willing to give everything that I was for this little creature, right? Like he's a big creature now, but you know he'll be 18 in just a few days? It's crazy. Time just flies. It's always later than you think it is. Anyway, I'm not going to go down memory lane. So he's saying, if you are not willing to abandon those things and pick up the burden that he has already carried, because that's what Luke is doing, right? When Jesus says this, unless you pick up your own cross and come after me, you can't be my disciple. What do you think he means by it? When Jesus carried the cross, what is that? What is he carrying on his back? It's the punishment the world deserves. It's the punishment every one of us deserve. So how do we actually learn what the parable has to say to us unless we don't understand what the cross meant to him? How? We can't. We end up teaching all kinds of crazy stuff. We start teaching, well, God is the one who throws the feast. And then the reason he gave this excuse is because of this. Because the people who try to teach the parable that way didn't get it. They were the ones sitting in the middle of the room going, oh, blessed is he who eats bread in the kingdom, right? You can say all the things that you thought you knew were right, but when it comes down to it, you're not. Because you missed the point. Because you took it out of context. Because here he goes. He says, unless you pick up your cross and come after me. Because what is the cross? It's the burden he carried for all of us. So unless we can carry the burden of the people he loves and not put that burden on them, we don't really love them. You understand? I'll say it again. Unless we can carry the same burden that he carried, unless we can carry that burden, we don't even know what it is to love them in the first place. You can't learn to love your children until you learn to love like he does. Until he learned to love like he is currently loving us. Because how many days do we want to just go, you know what, I'm tired of this, and throw it off our shoulders? How many days do we want to just give up and not go forward? And where did he carry it? All the way to the end for every one of us who sit here. So why does he say that? I mean, I'm sure this crowd wouldn't get it like, oh, well, is he talking about cross? He's carrying a cross? Because they had no idea. We're just eavesdropping on a conversation, aren't we? I'm sure if you cared about this guy and what he had to say, you would think about the words that he said, and then when he was hanging on that cross, you would understand. If you were that Pharisee sitting in that room who thinks he knows what he's doing and what he's talking about as he's jockeying for position, guess what? You didn't until you actually thought about it and you cared about him more than advancing yourself or your family's name. All right? Jesus meant what he said. You can't truly love your family unless you hate them first. And even yourself. Because I tell you what, when God hit me right between the eyes and knocked me off my high horse, I wasn't all, hey, look at how awesome of a person I am. God picked me out of all the people he could pick. I still ask myself that question today. Why would you pick me? What kind of potential do I have? He knows. I don't. I have to trust. So do you. Because he knows. There was a reason he picked all of us and put us in this room. He didn't put you in the seat that you picked. But the beautiful thing is that you can learn from this parable, and you should read it again. You should read it again. Because he just keeps hammering the parables through this one. So now he goes on, and if you were in this group, like, tell me how much sense this would make to you, because now he starts talking about towers. He's like, what kind of guy goes out and tries to build a tower and doesn't have enough money to do it? Everybody ridicules him for trying to make a tower when he tried to build it, and he couldn't. It makes perfect sense to me. You guys got it? Okay, good. I'm so glad you asked. Okay, so if you try to build a tower or a house, let's make it a house, right? Because this was an actual story back then. It was an actual parable. You guys know the two men who built a tower was an actual thing that happened in Jerusalem, and everybody made fun of them. Everybody knew the story. Everybody made fun of them. They knew the story. It would be like, I don't know, what was modern day? It would be like Edison making a light bulb, and he actually failed, so everybody made fun of him, and they said, oh, you're acting like a real Edison, right? That's the story he's telling. If Edison was to fail, I can't think of somebody who, the Goodyear guy? No, I can't think of somebody who they like ridicule now. But anyway, that's what happened back then. So now think about it. He lays his foundation, and then guess what? Everybody mocks him because he got the foundation done. He got some walls put up, but guess what? It's not much of a tower. He didn't really count the cost. It doesn't matter. And then he moves on to another parable where there's a king, and he goes on to war, and he's got 10,000 guys, and he says, hey, you got 20,000. Let's have peace, right? All of a sudden, he's like, oh, let's not do it. Well, these two parables make sense together in the context of everything that's happened before this. Because who is it? Who eats bread in the kingdom of God? Blessed is he who eats bread in the kingdom of God. Which one of you can build your stairway to heaven on your own? Which one of you can wage war against God's enemies and overcome them? None. Because everyone, okay, and this is the thing that should make every one of us uncomfortable. Because as we try to move closer to God, we do it in every way that we shouldn't ever do it. And I'll try to end right here, okay? Because I'm almost there to the salt part, okay? We try to build towers, and we try to do it on our own, and we say, you know what, if I just follow this rule, I can get there. And what are we doing? We're focusing on ourselves. If I just pray for my kid over and over again, they're going to bring honor to our family. Who are you doing it for? Why are you trying to build that tower? You didn't even measure what it's actually going to take, how much sacrifice you're going to have to make, because he already made it. He already paved the way. Why do you keep trying to build your own castle? He's already got a room. Why are you trying to make a name for yourself? He is the name above all names. What are we doing? Why are we always trying to push each other down or lift ourselves up? Because he's the only one who can do it in the first place. God's the one who brings the increase. So, guess what? If you're trying to do it on your own, you're not going to make it. And if you bring 10,000 men to the fight, there's 20,000 waiting. Because you can't do it without God. Because that's the thing that's missing from both of those. You don't see God in either one of those little parables, do you? You don't see Jesus insert himself. Like, I mean, how many times have you seen Jesus out there building towers, you know? It doesn't happen any in the book of Luke. If you guys can point it out to me anywhere in the book, I'm open for change. But I don't see Jesus building towers. I see him building people. That's what I see him building. And those people build other people. Because who do they work for? The guy who builds people. Because what is he doing? He's building a kingdom. And it's not made of stone. It's not made of idols that can't talk. It's made of people. And the culture you're part of, whether they speak Ethiopian or Ukrainian or Russian, all those people are part of the kingdom where you want to reside. The resurrection that you're looking for, the rest that you seek, is with those brothers and sisters. So, what does he say? And this brings it all home, doesn't it? Salt is good. Salt is good. Isn't it? It brings flavor. But if salt has lost its flavor, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is of no use, either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown away. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. When Jesus says that, that's not some arbitrary thing he says. He says, if you're listening, think about it. Because what are you currently building? Who are you working for? What seat are you trying to sit in? Because according to Carl Jung, and I don't know if you guys are studiers of philosophy or any of that, every single person that you run into, every single person that you see in the world has a mask on their face. They put a mask on, right? Like, we call them personas. Personas. We act like different people around different people. Like, I guarantee you, like my youngest son, we used to play this game called Horsey. And I guarantee you, none of you will ever play Horsey with me. Right? That's a persona I put on for my son so that we could play. That's what we did. And that's between us. But everyone that you see, adult, child, some influencer on TV, the president who likes to fall asleep at the podium, and every one of those people has a mask on their face because they're afraid of everyone around them. They're scared to death. So they hide themselves constantly. Just like Adam and Eve in the garden, the moment they realized they were vulnerable, what did they have to do? They hid and covered themselves. And every person that you see hides and they put on a persona. And they pick that persona from a story. And the sad part is most of the stories that people pick are tragedies. The only story you can pick that isn't a tragedy, where he came back, not just came back from death, but came back for us from death, is his story. So if you're trying to put on a persona, I couldn't think of a better one than the guy who was willing to give everything that he was for the person that you could be. Because he saw the potential of that person before you even could. And that's the cost of discipleship. We can never learn anything from him unless we're willing to give up everything that we are. Amen? How you guys doing? Do you need me to tell you a joke or blink my eyes a lot into the camera? I'm just kidding. I'm trying to lighten the mood a little bit, but it is something worth thinking about. Because a lot of people will just glaze over this, and they won't think about it. But me, I'm cursed with that. And I hope you guys enjoy that. It's not a curse, it's actually a blessing. Because wow. Because as much as I say, I hear. So for the guy who has ears, or the gal, guys or gals, I don't want to be exclusive here. Whoever has ears, hear what he has to say. Because we may just be eavesdropping in the conversation where he's aiming it at a Pharisee. But guess what? We can hear what he has to say. Because he speaks loud enough for everyone to hear. And everyone will hear. And every knee will bow. And they will realize that there's been no human like he was. And there's been no king like he was. And whatever name that any human has ever built for themselves will never be greater than his. Because his love supersedes all. So I'll end right there. I'll pray. And then if you guys have questions, you can throw them at me. Because I love the Bible, and I could talk for